Hello and welcome to the Media Leader Podcast. I'm Omar Oakes and I'm joined today with Nick Manning. Say hello, Nick.
Hello, Omar, and hello, everybody else.
There was a big story that came out last week by the US trade body, the ANA, which had some pretty strong recommendations into so-called principal media. And we're going to get into that and why it's important. And I think something a bit different for this podcast where we have a bit more of a in-depth discussion and see where it takes us. I'm a bit nervous. I'm not really sure, but you're my guinea pig for this, Nick. I hope that's all right.
I'm so pleased to hear it, Omar.
So, Nick, for anyone, I mean, regular readers and listeners will know who you are, but just for the benefit of anyone who doesn't, who are you?
Well, that's a very good question. I do wonder sometimes these days because most recently I've become something different to what I was before. So having spent 27 years in media agencies, obviously including co-founding Manning Gottlieb and all that, running OMD's operations, 17 years in independent consulting, 10 years with Ubiquity, a year at MediaLink, and then doing my own thing. But more recently, chapter 3 of a book that I didn't realise was going to go on quite so long. I've spent more time becoming a bit of a commentator, observer, as well as being I invest, I sit on boards and I consult and do stuff like that. But the thing that I'm really enjoying at the moment, more than anything else actually, is reading and writing about media every day, more or less every day. And that's articles, it's blogs, it's podcasts, it's presentations, and so on. And I'm finding it incredibly interesting. And when I was at primary school, I remember a teacher saying to me, you should go into journalism when you grow up. And I've just realised that I've just grown up. And it's not journalism, it's commentating and it's observation. But every day in media is different. Every day something new crops up. And it's incredibly exciting. There's an awful lot of stuff that is not good about it, but there's an awful lot of stuff that is, and we're never short of content, are we?
So let's get into it. The ANA last week released this report into principal-based media. Sometimes we're talking about inventory media, proprietary media. Explain, what are we talking about, Nick?
Well, we're talking about broking. So we're talking about a situation where the agency, a media agency or media agency group, supposedly buys media at one price, and resells it to their clients at an undisclosed markup. So rather than the client paying what the agency paid plus a commission or fee, they don't know what the agency paid for the media, but they do know what they pay themselves for it. And there's a gap between what the agency secures the media for from the media owners and what the client pays the agency. But that gap is unknown.
And what's wrong with that? I mean, hasn't that always happened as long as we've had agencies who are buying media? Big media agencies will have deals with TV broadcasters, for example, and the clients benefit from, don't they, from having bulk deals?
They do very often benefit from bulk deals or agency group deals and so on, especially in television, not just TV, but others. But that's normally a situation where it's about collective bargaining by the agency on behalf of all of their clients, and they're using the combined clout of their clients' volume to secure discounts for all of their clients. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's been going on forever. But normally it was conducted in a way where the price that the agency got was the price that the client paid. Having said all of that, when I entered the industry as long ago as 1980, there was some broking still going on. In fact, at the very first company I worked for, there was a bit of that going on. So it's not exactly new. And it operates in the UK in a way because the media agency acts as principal, which means that they are responsible for paying the media owners. And therefore, they get the bills from the media owners, and then they can decide what to do with them to a certain extent. The US is a bit different, and we might go on and talk about that. But so the possibility of doing it has always existed, but it's only really in the last, I'm going to say 10 to 15 years, actually. And the only advantage of being in the industry this long is that I can talk about 10 to 15 years as though it was quite a short period of time. But it started to become on vogue when the media agencies were under pressure to create more revenue for themselves because they weren't creating enough revenue from the normal sources, which is clients. and especially when you have to pitch and win those clients, which is an extremely difficult thing to do. But the shortcut is to make a difference between what you pay the media owners and what you charge your clients. And that became much more en vogue, 10 or so years ago, 15 years ago. And bear in mind that this whole subject was dealt with extensively in 2016 in the ANA report that came out then. Exactly the same thing's been going on for a long time. The only difference really is that the money is much, much bigger now. And the ways that the media agencies are able to find spreads and other revenues has grown exponentially since then as well. Because the pressure is on them to create and effectively fabricate more revenue and more income. Because they are under so much pressure to do so. And really the only way they can do it realistically in bulk is to broke. And that's how you end up with principal or proprietary media.
Interesting that you use the word fabricate there. That implies that there's something, that they're making something up. I mean, what do you mean by the word fabricate?
Yeah, well, what I mean by fabricate is they have to produce revenue, more revenue, because they are asked to and told to by their parent companies. And if you can't do that through legitimate means, by charging clients, what you need to charge clients, by winning new business, then you have to find other forms of income. So the media agency groups basically, they have armies of people the whole time just looking at ways to generate more income for themselves from the supply chains that they deal with, whether that be broadcasters and publishers, ad tech companies, data companies, analytics companies. Anybody who wants to do business with a holding company, media agency holding company groups, is confronted with an issue. They want to do business with them because that's where all the clients are. So you can operate in bulk. But if you walk in there and say, I want to do business with you, then the media agency group will say, well, in order to become one of our preferred suppliers, we need to deal with you. And that deal could be, we get 10% of the first year's revenue coming back through you. Could be that, we have the ability to mark stuff up. There are myriad ways of doing it, many, many more than ever before. Because the supply chains are so much more extended. There are so many other people to do this with, and so many other people who want to gain access to the clients. And if you're a new ad tech company, for example, or a new data company, whatever, the first thing you do is go to the you go to the group, the media agency groups, because that is where the control is. Otherwise, you have to flog your way around all of the clients individually, and most of them won't even want to talk to you. If you get hold of one at all, they'll say, speak to my media agency. So if you want to break into the marketplace, you have to go and talk to the media agencies, and there's a price for doing that.
Yeah, as you described in your column, your lengthy column, which we published last week on the Media Leader, it's very comprehensive. I'll link to it in the show notes. You say not being on the preferred supplier list is the velvet rope of the cool nightclub, which means that it's not just the planning that gets distorted, it's also how the plan is executed. We go back to what you said before about this all stems from media agencies not creating enough revenue. I mean, you created a media agency, Manning Gottlieb Media, which sold to Omnicom, now part of the OMD network. So your old agency is very much one of these agencies. How does it work with these holding companies? What is deemed not enough? How did it get to that point?
It gets to that point when the holding company needs to demonstrate growth to its shareholders and to the market as a whole, analysts, so on. And if within the holding company some of your businesses are underperforming, you turn around to the ones who can overperform and say, please overperform. So typically in holding companies, what happens is that the creative agencies, who have always operated on much thinner margins, quite often in high single figures or low double figures. And the media agencies traditionally have been operating at 20 and more % margin, sometimes up to 30. And so what's been going on for donkey's years, and there is nothing new in this, but the awareness of it has been less than it should have been, is that the way that the holding companies work is that the media agencies subsidise the rest. both in terms of margin, because they're higher. Cash helps too, especially when the interest rates are now decent. And so if your creative agencies, for argument's sake, come under even more pressure, because clients say, I'm no longer going to pay retainers, they're going to query every cost. They're going to say, I'm taking this bit of it in-house into my studio. AI comes along and they go, actually, you know what? A, I can do some of this myself, but B, they want the agency to use AI to cut out a lot of cost. So the creative agencies are under a lot of pressure. Ditto for a lot of the other agency types within the holding companies, PR, specialty, you name it. And the media agencies are the only one of these companies who can actually generate revenue without having to win new business. So it's actually quite a simple formula. You can't turn around to a creative agency and say, can you find more money from somewhere magical? It used to be production markups used to be the biggest earner, and they've been cut back quite a lot.
What's a production markup?
Oh, it's when you're dealing with a production company on a TV commercial or another piece of content. Again, you pay one rate to them and another rate back to the client, openly or otherwise. And the production parts of the agencies were always the most profitable and lucrative part of that. But that's been hit, and so on and so forth. So the margins and the absolute revenues and the margins in the other parts of the big holding companies have been under pressure for a long time. So the media agencies have to bail them out, and the media agencies, as I say, are the only ones who have got a source of revenue that is not immediately related to day-to-day trading, and that is to squeeze all of their supply chain partners, and they do it in the way I've just described by saying, if you want to deal with us, this is the way we do it. Or you go to a media owner, and they work with all the media owners, and you say, look, I want something extra, and the something extra used to be cash, and that came back in the form of a cash rebate. Then that was exposed partly through the ANA study. So that was turned into free and low-cost inventory that would be flogged off. That's been somewhat exposed. And here we are now. They're basically, and by the way, it was almost completely untransparent. So now we have the next generation of this, really, which is saying to the clients, well, actually, we can buy this media on bulk, supposedly, they say, at our risk. But you need to pay, you can get it at a cheaper rate than what you would normally pay, but we're not going to tell you what rate we paid for it. So there's a delta there, but it's positioned as being in the client's interest because they can actually buy that media cheaper than they would have done if it weren't proprietary media. It's a bit of a shell game going on, but that's fundamentally the way it's positioned to the marketplace.
And if I was working at an advertiser and I wanted to look more deeply into this, I mean, which areas, what media inventory are we talking about? Are there particular areas of media where you tend to get this principle-based media more than others? Is it TV? Is it outdoor? Is it somewhere in audio?
Well, one of the interesting things about it is that a lot of the extra income, let's call it that, has been coming and still does come out of the digital supply chain because there are so many more links in that supply chain and so many other places you can go for the extra. The interesting thing about proprietary or inventory media or principal media, I'm just going to call it, broking essentially for shorthand here, is that the medium in which it is most prevalent is television. And there's two good things about that. One is that that's high volume, so you can make more that way. But it also means you're not reliant upon just the digital supply chains in order to make up your money. So you've got proprietary media, broking in television and others, and all of the other things in digital and other supply chains. The other aspect of this, which I refer to in my article, which is probably one of the better kept secrets in media, is this thing called program finance. Program finance works very simply, is that the media agency holding company has an arm which provides the cash to production companies to make programs, and then the broadcasters buy those programs in, and via the mechanics of the deal, the media agency ends up with a lot of airtime on that channel that they can do whatever they want with. There are rules and regulations, well, there are guidelines about it, but essentially they end up with a lot of airtime that they've broked in order to fund the deal. So financially, there is a cost to the media agency group of funding the program, but they will get more than that back from the media owner in airtime value. So you'd be surprised how many programs on British television are funded in that way. And what it means is there's a lot of airtime slushing around in the system that has been effectively created within the overall wrapper of miniatures generally, of course, in that manner. And it affects the smaller channels more than the bigger ones, but it's rife across the whole of the industry. And not many people know this, as Michael Caine might say, but it is one of those unknown factors that's been knocking around now for about 15 years or more, but very much below the surface and very untransparent.
And what's the impact of that? I mean, if program finance was never invented, how would the world be different now?
Well, it means that a lot of the programs that are on television wouldn't get made. So if you're a production company and you've got a fabulous treatment that you want to make, and it could be, the latest reality TV show, or it could be a remake of an old one. These days, it's more of the latter than the former. You go to a broadcaster and say, "Will you commission my program, please?" And they say, "Not unless you can get it funded." So then the production company goes to a media agency group and they do a deal, and they go back to the broadcaster and they say, "Good news, we've got some money to make the program, so you don't have to pay for it yourself. Here you go." And then the deal gets done, airtime gets allocated accordingly, and off we go. But as I say in my column, it's more likely you're going to get a ratings winner that way. Because what's in it for the channel? Well, what's in it for the broadcaster? The broadcaster is getting the program pretty much for free, but they also want it to do well because they want to attract more audience, and that way they can sell more advertising at higher prices. So to the phrase that I use, they're more likely to make a new reality TV program than a documentary about Schoenberg, for example, where they want the big ratings. They don't want to do something niche. This is not altruistic. They're not saying, "Oh, good, if I can get that money in, I can make a program that I otherwise wouldn't be making, which is going to be unpopular." This is not being done in the interest of the British cultural institutions. So they're more likely to make reality TV programs or anything that they think is going to get a bigger audience, and it could be argued that just means that there's an awful lot more content that is designed purely for that purpose rather than the enlightenment of the British public.
Yeah, I was as a TV viewer, I just assumed that we're stuck in this 90s time loop where somebody my age may have been the last linear TV watching generation. So I just get fed. It's the same with music. You just get fed all this stuff nowadays, which is rehash of stuff you were watching on telly in the 90s. I wonder if
Gladiators
that was part.
Or whatever,
yeah, I mean, which is done fantastically well for the BBC. I suspect Gladiators hits this sweet spot of being attractive to a younger audience nowadays because it's a bit crazy, novel, what's going on there, but also nostalgic for older people. So it's a double hit.
And they improve the format. They make it better. It's not as though they're just trying to sort of revive the 80s version of it or the 70s version of something. It's they make it better with a new. I mean, particularly in terms of the celebs who take part, the newer generation of celebrities, as opposed to Les Dawson or something.
Which would be interesting.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
He could probably be recreated through AI now, but nobody would bother.
I'm sure that they've done that with Elvis Presley, and I'm sure Les Dawson is next on the list.
Yeah.
And so this A&A report, quite interesting figures that came out of it. So you had about just under half, 48% of marketers who responded to a survey that they did. They said that they are, quote, very familiar. Just under half are very familiar with principal media. 39%, nearly 4 in 10 are somewhat familiar.
Yeah.
And only 13% are not familiar. So it's not as if what we're talking about is alien to most of the buy side community, the brand side community here.
No.
But however, the report says this overall lack of knowledge is concerning. Television and the open web, as you say, are the most common media types using principal media. Other media and non-media also used. what I can't help thinking. So, Nick, after leaving agency land, you worked at Ubiquity, and I'm wondering when a report like this comes out, what's the role of the media auditor here? I mean,
damn good question.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an advertiser and you employ these media auditors to make sure that a media agency is being transparent and everything's legitimate, what's the role of the auditor here?
Well, you've got to distinguish between performance media auditing and contract compliance media auditing, and lots of people confuse them. But it's important that we don't. So if you're a performance media auditor, you're not really looking at transparency per se. You're actually looking at the exit price that the client pays. The exit price being essentially the price that the client sees. And you're comparing that usually versus the average for the market. So it doesn't really matter to you so much whether it's proprietary media or non-proprietary media. You're just looking at the exit price. And you know that the agency is buying that at a lower rate to themselves than would normally be the case. But that's not your primary consideration. You're looking at what the client paid. And you're comparing that with every other client you've got and what they paid. So you go, well, we don't necessarily like proprietary media if you're a performance media auditor, but it doesn't affect you very much because you're not looking at the wholesale price. You're not looking at the price that the agency secured it at. You're looking at the exit price for your client. So they take quite a neutral position on this subject. Contract compliance auditors and disclosure. I'm the non-executive chairman of one of these, media marketing compliance. It's a different matter because if MMC is trying to understand the amount of money that an agency is making out of the client, which is the kind of thing that contract compliance auditing does, they are prevented from doing that if the client has said, no, I'm going to use proprietary media or broking. And so MMC can't see beyond, and the client says, I'm not going to allow you to have access to those records, and the agency won't show you. So it's more of an issue for the contract compliance auditing side of this, so there is a kind of different view in different parts of the business about this. My view, for what it's worth, and I do work with the MMC, so it's partly a bit of a fear about that. But the real thing is, I just really object to the principle that a media agency is essentially reselling media to its clients, because you cannot be entirely impartial and objective if you do that. So the analogy I use is, if you're working with an independent financial advisor, he's looking after your portfolio of money or whatever, savings, ISAs, you name it, and he says to you, or she says to you, well, we can make you more return on your investments via this other scheme. But I'm not going to tell you what's in it for us. I'm going to sell it. I'm effectively going to recommend it to you. You will be better off because it will do better than the other investments that I look after. But I'm not prepared to tell you how much money I make extra out of recommending it to you. In the financial services industry, that doesn't actually work that way because of regulation, but we don't have that. And I wouldn't trust an independent financial advisor who was not prepared to tell me why they were promoting one thing over another. But I was better off. You'd sort of say, well, okay, I'm better off, but what is really going on below the surface here? So it's a murky world. I mean, I know a lot about the way that these things operate behind the scenes in media. No idea about financial services, but it's pretty bloody murky in media at times. And the idea that the frontline media agencies, the client-facing media agencies, are having to sort of go along and promote certain things without revealing the fact that they're making, that more money is being made at the back end by doing it that way. And in the case of proprietary media, the client-facing media agency is going to the client and saying, you'll be better off if we do it this way. In other words, the media that you buy will be cheaper as long as you don't ask too many questions about how we're doing it or how much money we're making out of it. It's just fundamentally not a good idea, because media agencies should be there to only work in the best interests of their clients and to safeguard their clients' interests. And that doesn't just apply to proprietary media, it applies to fraud, invalid traffic, and anything else that doesn't maximise the return on investment of the client's budget. And there are so many of those these days that's the part of the problem, is that media agencies are so reliant now on the supply chains, they can't rock the boat, even though their traditional role was to protect the client's interests and stop that sort of stuff from happening.
Yeah. It's almost unbelievable to hear you say this, because you remind me of a friend who is an executive coach. They run this business by themselves, and some of the clients they have work in major corporations, and the corporation will pay for this executive coaching. It's very commonplace. The problem is you just become one of a million suppliers to this massive corporation, and in order to do that, you have to go through procurement and you have to fill out forms and paperwork, and that's a job in itself. And that's actually one of the major bottlenecks to this person getting more business, is because having to go through this process every time. And to hear you talk about how media agencies could be able to offer a major corporation this sort of media trading setup, where don't ask me too many questions, you don't need to know, you'll get it cheaper, that's all you need to know. I'm amazed that it could go through a major corporation's compliance, legal, because you say it's not like finance, and of course that's right, but at the end of the day you are dealing with financial flows, and let's take it to the extreme. Who's to say that it's not coming from illegal operations? And as the client, I mean, if it's their money that's funding illegal operations, it doesn't matter if they didn't know about it. Ignorance of the law isn't a crime. So how do they guard against that? Well,
it's let's be really clear. Is that I make it probably sound slightly more Machiavellian than it really is because when they go to the client, they say, you're going to get exactly the media that you would have had, except you're going to get it cheaper. So it isn't necessarily palming bad stuff on them. Sometimes that happens, and sometimes more often than not. And if the client's savvy enough, they'll make sure that happens. And then they'll ask their media auditor to validate that as well. But the loss of transparency is certainly not something that most CFOs or even audit and risk committees of large corporations should be happy with. But I think the trouble with this is it's so far down the food chain, it's so remote from the front line, it's so back office that it doesn't matter so much. And the other interesting thing is, and this is the other factor in all of this, is that it is often positioned as being a real advantage to the client, because the agency says, we're going to bundle it all up, we're going to charge you a single rate for your media and your fees, and they'll put data in there and other stuff as well. So it's positioned as being all-round good business. And on that bit of it, you don't need to pay a fee because the profit is built in. And if you look at what Brian Weezer has written about this, and he's never wrong, by the way, he really isn't. He says, actually, this is going to be and will become even more the preferred trading mechanism for a lot of US advertisers in particular, because it's bundled up in such a way as it just looks like everything's cheaper, including fees. And it cuts out the whole debate about working, non-working. But really what it's doing is it's just making everything a lot less transparent. You can't necessarily separate out the media cost versus the fee versus data. And it's in the media agency's interest to make sure that is all bundled up in such a way that you simply can't disentangle it all. And you also say, in order for you to benefit from this, you have to sign a thing called an opt-in that says that by buying this, you waive your rights to be able to analyse it in the way that you normally would between the cost of media, the fees, and the back-end pricing and so on. And a lot of advertisers are buying into this. And I think that's because on the surface, it can look very, very attractive. And I don't blame any advertiser for doing that, because everyone's got short-term needs. It looks cheaper, it looks better. It allows them to go back to their paymasters and go, look at me, I've got a better deal. I'm paying less for the inventory. I'm paying less in fees. It looks great on the surface, but what my article that you kindly published says, that may look like the case, and the ANA study, accepts that it's going on, but provides guardrails for it. What I'm saying, in essence, is get it, but it's bad for it's bad for the advertising industry that this is happening. And I list out quite a few reasons why that is, which I'm sure we'll explore in a second. But,
let's get into that. So, if the advertiser's getting media cheaper and these media agencies, which have, 10 to 15 years ago were under pressure to make more money, and hey, they are making more money.
Yeah.
So the buy side and sell side, aren't they doing quite well out of this?
Well, the sell side, maybe not so. That's a separate issue. Let's address that separately. But the core thing I say, and it's not in any individual advertisers' remit to solve this. It's bad for the advertising industry and everybody within the advertising industry for reasons which may not be immediately apparent. And the main reason is that I chose my words carefully here, so I'll have to choose them carefully again without having them in front of me, which it basically legitimizes and normalizes a bad way of working.
What's a bad way of working?
A bad way of working is that there are 6 significant players in the global advertising market, the holding companies, 6, which limits choice to advertisers because it's only 6. But those 6 are incredibly competitive with each other. And in any given pitch situation, they will slash their rates for everything, and they will offer suicidally low media costs and suicidally low fees, knowing that they can probably make it up out of other things from the supply chain. Not a healthy situation, because what it does is it gets into a vicious spiral where the clients know that if they go to market, they can get low fees and they can get low media rates, and they can push extended payment terms, which is a slightly separate subject, but is part of this. So it just keeps everybody within this vicious spiral of down, 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 lowest common denominator, race to the bottom. And it means that we live in an artificial world where agencies are not being funded correctly. They're being funded from back-end revenues that are sourced from the supply chain. They're not being funded from proper client fees. And that is not in the agency's best interests. We've got, unfortunately, the business model that the agencies are working on is not the right one. They're not being paid properly for what they do. They add a lot of value. They can add a lot of value. They can do all sorts of things, and they're being asked to do even more. But they're not being paid the going rate for the job. And we're talking here about the client-facing agencies. Meanwhile, revenues are flowing through to the holding company, the buying groups behind them, and then the holding companies behind them. And the client-facing agencies do not get the benefit of these trading deals. If anything, they're being asked to actually sacrifice more of them because it's got to flow back up through the buying groups and then the holding companies. So as a result, and this is all spelled out in my article, but it's a long one, so just for the benefit of brevity, there's an even longer version if you want it. So starting salaries for graduates in media agencies when I left the media agency world were 25 grand a year. I was talking the other day to somebody whose daughter's just started on 23, and this is 20 years later. In the meantime, the cost of living has probably quadrupled. We're talking about rent, we're talking about buying, we're talking about rail fares, food, going out, you name it. And as a result, if you talk to a lot of clients, this was raised at the WFA Congress in Toronto last week, a lot of clients are saying we're not getting the seniority of staff that we used to get. We're not getting the kind of people that we think we need. Media agency folk are being asked to bat, bowl and field across so many different media channels now with data analytics here, and you've got to be able to operate TikTok, and you've got to be able to do this, and you've got to do everything on less money. And as a result, people in media agencies are under a huge amount of pressure. They're under a lot of stress. And, we have a mental health crisis in our industry, which can't be solved through soft means. It's really only, in my opinion, can only be solved by working people less hard and paying them more money. Sounds a bit basic, doesn't it? But actually, that's normally how it works. So if we want to solve the mental health issue, we've got to provide the money to do that. If you want to solve the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you want to hire people in from Bradford and Birmingham and Aberdeen and wherever, they can't afford to come and work in London or Manchester on these rates because rentals are so high. So there's so many kind of Freakonomics style knock-on of consequences of all of this. And it's not for individual advertisers to kind of worry about that because they can't afford to worry about it. It's for the people who care and the advertiser trade associations and other bodies, including, one would hope, the IPA, to go, you know what, this is really bad stuff. But it's the workings of the market. There's not much we can do about it. And if you trace it right back, it's also got a lot to do with the hegemony of the big digital platforms. And my favourite factoid of late last week was that the Trade Desk, which is an intermediary company, its market value is now $40 billion. Publicis and the entirety of Publicis is 30. So an intermediary company like the Trade Desk is worth a lot more than the biggest of the big holding companies. WPP is worth 13 million. Trade Desk is worth over 3 times. I've written about this before. I wrote about this first time several years ago, but all that's happened is that the gap has widened. And all the money is flowing into the wrong places. So it's not flowing to the advertisers, it's not flowing to the holding companies who are doing the work, it's flowing to the intermediaries in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, haven't you just hit the nail on the head there where, when you were talking about the big 6 before, how big is that big 6? I mean, when it comes to offline media, of course, you still need a big agency to plan and buy that for you. But what has happened in the last 10 to 15 years with the rise of digital, social, search, affiliate marketing, shopper media, etc., is that you just got this all the growth in advertising in that time has come from small and medium-sized businesses who are buying direct on digital platforms. So they're not buying through Dentsu or WPP or Omnicom, whatever. As you say, a lot of them, they aren't being represented by the ANA. They're not even aware of our discussion or anything that we're talking about. Yet it's their money which is propping all of this up. Isn't it the structure of where we are as a market now, where essentially, people like me who work in trade media, maybe we focus too much on the big 6, when actually there's a whole other world there which represents what's really going on in advertising and marketing, where you can have the Trade Desk. One SSP alone is worth more than the world's biggest agency holding group.
You've hit the nail on the head there, in as much as the advertising industry is no longer an homogenous thing. It's subdivided into other parts. And the bit that's doing the best, as you say, is the non-traditional bit. The bit that's going through the agencies is not doing very well. I mean, the average agency growth, holding company growth last year was 2.3%. Amazon, Google, Meta are all growing by 20% and more. In fact, Amazon's Q1 revenues this year are up 24%. And the holding companies were on aggregate about 2.4. So there's a 10x there. Because absolutely the big digital platforms are servicing they're servicing a lot of the big advertisers, but they're actually servicing this gigantic long tail. And retail media is a big part of that now, digital commerce. And the market in which this is happening the most is the US. It's the largest advertising market in the world. And the erosion of traditional media in the US is faster and bigger than it is in other places for all sorts of reasons. Linear television in the US is suffering more than it is elsewhere. And we could talk about that as well, the reasons for it. But yes, all the growth is going into self-service platforms. It's going into mom and pop businesses, small and medium businesses who can do it themselves. They can create an ad, they can place an ad. AI is driving all of it in terms of the ability to generate content via generative AI, and general AI is doing the distribution job for you. And that's harming the holding companies enormously. They're not getting a decent share of the total cake, including the self-service side of it. And it's putting the holding companies under more pressure, who then pressurize their media agencies to crank the handle more to make up for that. So we're in this kind of vicious spiral that is not helping anybody right now. And meanwhile, Google, Meta, Amazon, TikTok, they're running away and smiling because they're getting massive uplifts in revenue. And that actually also changes the balance of power between them and the media agencies, because the media agencies have got no purchase over those guys. They're not a big enough chunk of their revenue. So if anything, they're in hock to the big digital companies and can't afford to piss them off. So you will never ever hear any of the big groups talking negatively about Google, because if you do, it can be quite a career limiting thing to do. So that's where we are, and there's no point trying to paint lipstick on this particular pig. It is where we are, and there's no, I think that the industry sometimes just pretends that things are different to what they actually are. And it's, people kind of say, oh, you're being really negative. Isn't advertising wonderful and all that? You kind of go, yeah, it is when it's done well. I'm still major advocate of it and all that. But we've got to be honest and truthful about the industry that we're in, and what is going on, the kind of behaviours that are going on, like principle-based media and all that. We've got to talk about it, because otherwise we'll never ever address any of the ills of the industry. So we have to be honest and talk about this openly if we're going to do anything about it.
Yeah, that's why we're doing it now. And so we've talked a lot about why the particular effects this has had on the buy side. What about the sell side as well for media owners? I mean, how does this impact on them?
It depends which media owners you're talking about. But let's take the smaller media owners, for example. If they want to be on the preferred supplier list, if they want to get beyond the velvet rope, then they have to offer highly attractive rates for their inventory and highly attractive trading benefits back to the buying groups, just to get on the schedule. And that especially applies to media platforms who are trying to do things differently, either in the common good for the people, or they're minority owned, or female led, or whatever. Particularly in the US, this is an issue. The monies are not flowing in the right places to those companies. You've written extensively about this and you've spoken a lot about it, but the money is not flowing to the right broadcasters and publishers who have got high content costs, and they are the ones who are most beholden to the agency groups. So if you're a big broadcaster, you have to deal with the big six. You're not getting the mum and pup business, you're not getting that long tail that all the other guys get. And that is true for most of the big media owners who have got high content costs, against the big digital platforms who have no content costs. So all the money is flowing to the people who don't need it as much, and away from the people who do. And if you're beholden to the big six, as so many of them are, you are beholden to pressure on your inventory from things like proprietary media. So you sit there and the agency says, okay, I want to do a deal with you. I want to buy this much inventory at this rate, at a lower rate. I want to buy this much inventory at a higher rate, but I'll tell you what that is. And you can't really say no. You just have to take a value judgment. Is it better to secure the business from this group on balance and do it that way, or do you try and take them on? And if you're beholden to them because there's only six of them, then you pretty much have to do that deal.
The broadcasters, though, they are trying to get more into this game, though, aren't they? So Sky in the UK, the AdSmart programmatic platform, that's been around for more than 10 years now. And ITV has Planet V. You have lots of options for the long tail to get involved if they want to. And there are much more regional targeted options than ever before for your mom and pops to advertise on local telly, digital. So they are trying to, aren't they? I mean, don't you think that this is the way that all media is going?
Up to a point, I think the broadcasters have done a good job of trying to generate business in other ways, because they're not just sitting there waiting to be kicked by the big groups. They have generated other lines of business, and ITV in particular have done a very good job with ITVX. They're doing some very interesting things with automated content type of offerings, search-based offerings, Sky with AdSmart, and Channel 4 have done some very interesting things as well. But it's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it's the incremental revenue that comes from those sources is good revenue, but it's not. It is not the main act, which is still mostly the sort of the big money is coming from the big advertisers. Whether it be on the linear platform or the digital platform, it doesn't really matter much as long as you get it. And the ability to drive incremental revenues through other means is there, but it's still going to be the minority of the revenue, which makes it interesting, but it's not going to transform your fortunes.
I think it's incredibly fascinating when you think about how younger generations of people are consuming media. Not that I am so young anymore, but I probably consume YouTube more than any other media owner. And what am I watching? It's a mix of broadcaster content, which has been repurposed on YouTube, but also YouTubers, essentially video bloggers. And they're essentially doing it for themselves, and they make money off the rev share.
Yeah.
And you just think that we have moved almost to this world where big broadcasters, big media agencies, there's just this whole world of media that exists outside of them. And almost, if we're looking back in 15, 20 years on what happened in the 2020s, well, we see principle-based media as, what would you call it? The last roll of the dice before things got really bad and the walls came closing in without being too negative. Or is it just one of those things where it's just something that this industry, it's a foible, it's a quirk of this industry, and
I think it's an evolutionary process. I think this is a runaway train where what you've just described is going to happen. By the way, have you seen any good advertising on YouTube recently?
Sometimes when you can't skip, it's usually a 30-second TV ad that's been plopped on there, and generally, depending on the advertiser, the context, you can get some okay ones. Yeah, but there are some horrendous ones, I have to say.
Well, skippable ads and all, and also ads that leap out at you without you knowing. And I mean, this is almost like a separate conversation, which is about the curation of the advertising experience, which is really quite important. And there's lots of research that shows that good curation of advertising content is far more effective than the alternative. And Thinkbox have proven this, but unfortunately they tend to get bracketed as being an advocacy group, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt, whatever.
Just to be clear, what do you mean when you talk about the curation of the advertising?
Well signposted advertising in very specific places, so a commercial break.
Yeah.
As opposed to being sort of, throwing something at you when you least expect it. And properly constructed breaks of the right duration with good quality content in them of the right duration. There's a temptation to think that because the average attention span is 2 seconds these days, you have to write 2-second ads in order to do that. And I was very rude about Gary Vaynerchuk in the column before last about this subject when he said that organic social is the way to go. I don't know why anybody bothers with anything else. And the battleground is the first second. And so you go, well, I've got to write a brief that says I'm only going to write for organic social, not even paid social. And I've got to capture the attention of the audience in the first second of my content. And then I've got to put it in front of people in scale enough for that to make a difference. You're kind of going, surely even Gary can't believe that, because it's extreme even by his standards.
What's interesting about him, just as a quick aside, so I interviewed him, I want to say 6 years ago when I was at Campaign, and Facebook, when they were called Facebook, was doing an event and he was speaking and talk about preaching to the converted. He told this audience that advertisers should put 100% of their media budget on Facebook, because the ROI was so good on Facebook, it just dwarfed everything else. So why would you do anything else if you're just looking at the numbers, right? And I thought it's kind of like looking at your shopping bill at Sainsbury's or wherever and thinking, white bread's pretty cheap and it fills us up, so why don't we just spend 100% of our food budget on white bread?
Yes,
even though in the long run it'll probably kill you because it's not that good for you, and all sorts of problems are going to happen.
It's a good analogy.
But that's exactly the sort of narrative with, it's interesting about him because we talked before about the long tail. He was, he started up selling wine, didn't he? He was a direct to consumer wine merchant, and he was buying ads himself, and he had to create content by himself. And suddenly he realized, I can get attention by being funny and provocative, and that's his whole thing now.
It is. But also, if you said to him, look, I'm a white bread manufacturer, or even a bread manufacturer of any colour, really, Are you saying that I should, let's say I'm Warburton's, does that mean that I've got to go on organic social for my bread, and I've got to make an impression in the first second of the ad, otherwise no one's going to buy my product? It might be true for some things. So I have the conversation with people. So, everybody's watching TikTok now. We've got to make ads for TikTok. You go, not everybody's watching TikTok. I mean, everybody likes to think they are, but they're not. That's what the numbers say. And also, if TikTok's a crap advertising medium because people don't spend any time dwelling with it and don't take any notice of the ads, don't bloody use it for advertising then. You don't have to do that. And so, sometimes I just think that the industry has just lost its mind in terms of some of the things that it doesn't say. So the curation of the advertising experience, the advertising experience itself, and not the profitability analysis that I think Box did recently, but the one before that said, look, the effect of advertising to a group of people on a big screen in a communal area is completely different to a YouTube ad to one person in their bedroom. I'm exaggerating for lots of effect here, but it's completely true, and it's obvious and logical as well. And yet we all act as though everybody's only seeing advertising while they're scrolling on their mobile phone, in the privacy of their own pajamas kind of thing. And it's just nonsense. It really is. And the profitability analysis shows this as well, is that although media consumption habits have changed quite a bit, the way that people respond to advertising hasn't changed that much. Still the same things happen. And people still respond to the same kind of advertising more positively than they as positively as they used to in some, and less positively in others. And yet we act as though people only use social media, people only watch YouTube. And you're right. A lot of people do consume vast amounts of YouTube. Doesn't make it a great advertising medium unless it's used carefully and well. But it isn't always used carefully and well. And my use of YouTube is different to yours, but advertising popping up at me, I can't wait to get rid of it.
This is intriguing me, and it will lead on to something I do want to ask you about, which is a special event that you're planning in September, where the idea is to talk more about the broader themes about let's be honest, what's going wrong in the advertising industry.
Not going to talk about what's going wrong. We're going to talk about ways to address what's going wrong.
Right. Yeah. The solutions as well as the challenges, which is important. But this idea about the curation of the advertising experience. So I've written about it in bits before, where I remember when Netflix first announced that they were getting into the ad business, famously ad free for years and years and years, and were very snooty about advertising, if I can say that. And now suddenly, last week, they did an upfronts in the US, only the second time, of course, that they've done an advertising upfronts. And remember, when Netflix first announced that they were getting involved in advertising, they had Microsoft as their ad tech partner.
Yeah.
And
all of 2 years ago,
time passes quick, and that relationship didn't go as both parties planned, I think it's fair to say. And now they announced last week that they're basically becoming an open platform where lots of ad tech providers are going to be working with them. And this is exactly what, not that they listen to me, this is exactly what I was hoping that Netflix would not do. And I wrote about this at the time, that Netflix were pioneers of streaming video. They really developed, they formed these new-ish behaviors in terms of binge watching, and they should have, when they announced going into advertising, they should have taken that approach, in my view, where they should have, to your point, they really should have thought about the curation of the advertising experience. How is the advertising on Netflix going to be so good that people will want to consume it? It's not just a place to dump the inventory that you've got on YouTube and other video sharing platforms. But it seems that they haven't bothered with that, and they've just become another video platform. And disappointingly, we also hear similar things from Disney as well. We had Rita Ferro, the worldwide head of advertising, speak at our Future of TV Advertising conference recently, and she was asked about they've got, because they launched Disney Plus ad free, they've had a couple of years of content where it's not been designed to have ads inserted into it, and she seemed to have a very relaxed attitude. So, we'll just insert the ads retroactively, which is what Netflix is doing, and it's fine. But to your point, if the reason why a 40-minute TV show put into an hour scheduling of TV works so well is because the scriptwriter knows that, okay, there's going to be an ad break after 7 minutes and there's going to be another one at 20 minutes, etc., etc. So they put in little cliffhangers.
Yeah.
The writing of the show is created with the advertising in mind. It's a fully curated advertising experience, to use your language.
Yeah.
And you're just not getting that with online medium. And so over the course, this is really important because over the course of my career, people have, as I criticized different parts of the industry, said, oh, you're anti-TV, you're anti-digital, you're anti-this, you're anti-that. And I don't care about the delivery of media per se.
Yeah.
What I care about, and I think I've not thought about it in this way, but it's actually this disconnect between content which is designed to be watched in a certain way and the advertising, which is massively important. We need advertising to make sure that media is accessible to all kinds of people, not just rich people that can afford subscriptions. Yeah. That the advertising is congruent with the content. And YouTube is a great example of that, where it's just like, oh, let's just at random times, we're just going to hit you with ads.
Okay, so you've described very well what part of what the Who Cares movement is all about. So if you go back to, and again, the danger with doing this, going back a bit, everybody kind of goes, back into dinosaur territory again. But actually, there were a lot of good things about advertising, earlier on in my career. Is there was a symbiotic relationship between the media and advertising. Advertising paid for the media, and they worked together in harmony because you had good, well-curated advertising, often very entertaining, that was signposted well, that was limited, 3.5 minutes, rather than 7 or 8, and it was and the audience knew exactly when it was coming up. And people say, that's when they make the tea. You kind of go, well, that's not what the data says, actually. On TGI, there used to be a question, which is, I find the TV adverts more interesting and entertaining than the programs. And a lot of the time in those days, people said they were, because they were at that time, because people wrote and crafted good advertising. And to your point, also TV programs knew how to play that game, so they would write around that. So there was a kind of symbiotic relationship, both financially and in terms of the consumer experience, that worked extremely well. And we've gone as far away from that as it's possible to get. And one of the reasons, I think, is because, and I don't want to be rude about the US in this respect, but television advertising in the US always was interruptive. It was always there was always too much of it. You'd have ads after the opening credits. You'd have ads popping up throughout. And when Silicon Valley took over the advertising industry 15, 20 years ago, they treated advertising as if it was just the same thing. You've got eyeballs, we show ads, what could possibly go wrong? And so the bombardment started there, and the lack of curation, the excess. So if you think about, the old days where it's 3.5 minutes an hour on TV, magazines limited their editorial to ad ratio to X, so did newspapers, so did radio, and sometimes it was regulated by Ofcom or whoever that was in charge at the time. So there was a symbiotic relationship in terms of content and money, and now we've gone to the other extreme of that. And, the enshittification of everything, the way that the internet has been has grown up is the result of all of that. And there was an article in The Spectator that I saw this morning talking about the fact that the internet has now become a monster ruined by what they describe as the adpocalypse. And I think we can all relate to that. It's a great article. And, it's not, I don't normally read The Spectator. I saw it on Twitter and it's very good. And it is what Dr. Oakes called the enshittification. Advertising has enshittified so much. So, in the early days of the internet, it was about advertising was funding good content. Then it became about maximizing advertising revenue, and now it's about putting the consumer. The consumer is now the product, and it's advertising led, because that's where the money is coming from, and the money's gargantuan. So we've kind of got into a bad place. So, we have to be honest about all of this if we care about advertising, and some of us do, and some of us still do, and we care about it in a way that is not about, wouldn't it be great if we could turn back the clock and make 60-second TV ads again and show them in Coronation Street. It's kind of good advertising can exist in every platform, if it's good. And by being good, it doesn't take the public for granted. It doesn't invade their privacy. It doesn't bombard them. It doesn't irritate them. I mean, I sent round the other day on LinkedIn an ad from Twitter that I've been shown that was in some kind of African language that and I had no idea what the ad was for, but it was in some kind of mid-African language. And it's the tip of the iceberg, but that's kind of how advertising is working now. So the whole thing about personalization, greater targeting, audience targeting, all that sort of stuff simply hasn't happened. And so we've got to be honest with ourselves and go, all right, advertising has created this problem. Can advertising solve the problem? And that we don't know, but we're going to have a debate about whether it can or not.
Yeah, it's two things that are happening. On the one hand, I think about, I could go home this evening and I could pretty much, if I'm willing to pay for it or do a bit of work, I could pretty much watch any movie I want. Mm-hmm. I could pretty much listen to any song by any major recording artist that's ever been created. Yep. I could read any book that I want. Yep. I've got access to all this information. That is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
It is.
However, because as we said before, advertising is crucial to creating a media ecosystem where new quality content is always being created. It's not just talking about the decline of news journalism. We're also talking about, you touched on it with program finance. We're talking about how new television programs are made, how new movies are made. Why is it that all you get at the box office are Marvel movies and remakes and rehashes? Everything we're talking about feeds into this as well, because there aren't the incentives there. There aren't the commercial incentives to actually create provocative, risky, moving the Overton window sorts of content. That's why, again, I come back to, it feels like we're just being served up the 90s again and again, because the 90s was that last decade in which the internet wasn't the predominant medium.
And also because so many consumers remember the 90s and familiarity breeds favourability. So they liked those shows then and they don't mind them coming back. And, but I don't think the Overton window is closed. I think it's shut. And that's really the problem that we've got. And the trouble is that the excessive amount of advertising, it's become $1 trillion business. It wasn't that long ago since it was 600 billion worldwide. There is vast quantities of it, and it's funding so much. But the trouble is we are bombarding people, and we're not just bombarding them, we're bombarding them with stuff that is of no interest or relevance to them. And we're on a spiral down in terms of that. So, nobody's got a magic wand to solve all of this. These problems exist. They need to be talked about. What we're trying to do is to sort of say, let's be honest about it. Let's get it out in the open and let's see whether we can come up with some ideas and solutions to help address some of these issues.
Yeah. So what have you got planned? So you're planning this event in September with Brian Jacobs.
Yes.
Brian, so those who don't know, he used to be a media planner. He was at Leah Burnett. He was at Cara. Yep. Very well followed blog. Writes for the Media Leader as well. What's your idea? Why are you having an event? Who do you want to come? And what do you want to talk about?
Well, it all started because Brian and I have been writing about similar subjects for quite a long time, and grumpy old men talking about the good old days and what's gone wrong. I'm exaggerating actually, because we didn't really. But what we would point out the things that aren't so good about advertising, and we didn't necessarily say compared to the old days. We just talked about the things that are problematic. And I said to Brian about a month ago, I said, look, we talk about this stuff, but clearly, nothing much is changing. If anything, things are getting worse. Rather than just talking about it, why don't we hold an event and get a group of like-minded individuals into a room and thrash it out, not in terms of problems, because we all know what the problems are. There's no secrecy about the problems. I said, 90% of the people know what 90% of the problems are. So what can be done, if anything? And I thought Brian might say, don't be silly, that's a really stupid idea, let's forget about it and go play golf, which wouldn't be a good idea because he's much better than I am. But he said, no, it's a great idea, let's do it. He put his blog out on the Thursday. By the end of the weekend, we had over 100 people come back and say, we are Spartacus, we want to take part, we will help you. It's up to 150 now, 3 weeks in. The event on the September the 12th in the afternoon in London is being curated. We're just doing that now. We're going to get some guest speakers in who care. We think that we know that there's interest from all around the world because we've had messages of support from every corner of the globe just about. And there is a parallel movement happening in the US by complete chance as well, with a slightly different flavour to it. And it's been quite phenomenal over the last 3 or 4 weeks, really. We've had so many people wanting to help, offering, free services and stuff. It's entirely non-commercial. Nobody will make any money out of it, and shouldn't. It's not under Chatham House rules. If you've got a point of view, you say it and you're public about it. No sponsors, no nothing. And it's going to be damned interesting. And it's not just a one-off event. There will be other materials. There'll be social, there'll be podcasts, presentations. So it's going to become a movement. And whether or not it makes any difference to anything is entirely unknown. But if we don't try, we can't get anywhere. So we might as well try. And we might just hit a few, sixes in the process. And if we score in singles only, then that's fine too. So we don't know. But we're going to have a damn good go at it. And we're putting a lot of effort into it. Brian and I are lucky that at our stages we've got time, which is a rare commodity. We're not trying to make money out of this because there's no need to. And we'll see.
And when you say you've got over 100 people who are willing to turn up, get involved, speak, give their view, what sorts of people are we talking about generally? Can you generalise the sorts of people that...
Yeah, well, if I look at the 150 or so we've got now, broadly speaking, there's hardly any media agency people, which is understandable in many ways. We have a number of ex-media agency people, which is even more understandable. Hardly any media owners, nobody from any of the big digital platforms, and hardly any of the media auditors. But we've got everybody else. We've got creative agencies, we've got research companies, we've got a lot of individuals who are no longer working at big companies and have said, look, I support this. We've had lots of people saying to us, I privately support you, but I can't do so publicly. It's, and as I say, all around the world, weird and wonderful stuff sometimes, but a huge amount of support. And the people who can't support us because their jobs don't allow them to do so, or they've chosen not to for other reasons, to be a bit fairer in some ways. And that was all entirely predictable. And the people we've got, we thought we'd get, and the people we haven't got are the people we thought we wouldn't get. It wouldn't be that. It would be very surprising if we had a lot more support from the people that we assumed we wouldn't get. So, we're in a good place, and we've got no idea what's going to happen as a result of any of this, but we're going to give it a go.
And what's the ideal end goal? What do you hope to achieve? What would be a great result?
A good result, if I'm limiting our ambition, which we should, would be that there is a sort of sense that we're now going to be honest about our industry rather than papering over the cracks, which everybody does every day.
Just to dig into that, but what do you mean by how does that manifest itself? People papering over the cracks.
I think people, for commercial reasons, mostly people make out that black is white and white is black. So if you go back to proprietary media broking, you kind of go, do the media agencies think that this is a good idea? There might be somebody within them who does, but I would be inclined to bet that the majority of people in media agencies who are promoting broking do not think it's a good idea and would much rather not be doing it. And, if you look at the published materials from all of the holding companies and the media agency groups and the media agencies, you will not find any reference to this on any of their websites or any of their published material. No media agency says, you should come and work with us because we're very good at reselling airtime to you at one rate when we've paid another. There's not even a dicky bird about any of this on anybody's collateral because they're not proud of it. They'd rather not be doing it. And it's really only being done because it makes more money for the holding company. If it didn't, nobody would do it. You wouldn't, the job of the media agency is not to resell media inventory to its clients at an undisclosed fee. It's being done for the reasons we've talked about. And as a result, you won't find any reference to it on any of the agency's websites. And some of the entities that do this behind the scenes within the holding companies don't even have websites. They are shadowy figures who move behind the scenes and do this kind of stuff. But if they do talk about their services, you can kind of work your way into it. You can kind of understand why certain things are said, but there's a degree of what I might describe as unwillful dishonesty behind some of this stuff, because a lot of people pretend that black is white or white is black. And I guess what we're trying to do is we're just trying to be truthful and honest about some of the things that go on, because if we're not truthful and honest about them, then they remain clandestine and it doesn't get us anywhere. And we simply don't know the extent to which we're going to be successful.
What about regulation? What if, let's say we're by all accounts, we're probably going to get a Labour government at some point in the very near future in the UK, so a change of government anyway. And let's say whoever the culture secretary is, let's say that they're Chris Bryant. They're listening to this podcast, or they hear what people said at your event coming up in September, and they think, you know what, advertising is really important. If we want a free, diverse, vibrant media ecosystem, and the UK is a massive exporter of creative marketing services, we should be taking a lead on this globally. We need to regulate this industry so that it functions better. What would the first step be, do you think?
Well, that's an incredibly big question.
Or more broadly, have you thought about this? Do you think that it should be regulated?
Well, we don't think it should be regulated. We think the market should regulate itself.
Well, clearly it hasn't worked.
No, it hasn't.
We've just spent over an hour talking about how it hasn't worked.
No, absolutely. And we're starting to see a bit of this now in the US in terms of the Google cases that are going through the DOJ now and antitrust regulation, European Union, etc. They're starting to address bits of it to do with the big digital platforms. The problem with the advertising industry is it's not seen in a light that makes it likely to be regulated. It's seen as being an industry that, and it hasn't got a lot of sympathy either, because it's seen as being an industry that may not be deserving of special attention in some respects. But it's a massive economic driver, as you say. It employs hundreds of thousands of people, as you say, and it's really important for companies because it actually adds a lot to their wealth. So it should be a much more professional industry. And if it isn't going to be eventually, then regulation may be the only way we get to that. But that would take a recognition by any government, that it is all the things that I've just described to you. And I don't believe we're anywhere near that yet. And I would much rather we acted like a professional services industry voluntarily than being forced to do so. And I've been hearing for many, many years, almost as many years as I've been in the industry, we ought to be seen by clients in the same way that they see their lawyers and their accountants and other professional service providers. We should be more like McKinsey or BCG. We should be more like Accenture, Song, or whatever. And you kind of go, not sure about that, but we're a million miles away from being a professional services industry right now because of the way we treat our clients. You shouldn't find a management consulting business treating their clients with such disdain as to resell them media. Now, the answer is that McKinsey and Bain and Accenture can charge an economic rate for their services, arguably far more than they might. We're at the other end of that spectrum. We're undercharging the advertisers for our services because we chose to do so, and they asked us to, and we said yes. And the competition within the big groups has perpetuated that as well. So in order to become a professional services industry, we have to start charging properly for our services in a way that we don't at the moment. And it's going to take a very long time to get there, but that ultimately has got to be where we intend to get to. But that would take collusion on a grand scale for that to happen, and that's not legal nor likely to happen. So, it's going to take a generation to change, and I think what will happen is that when the holding companies start to be broken up, and I'm not saying if, I'm saying when they start to be broken up, and there's quite a lot of conversation about that now, then we'll see a much more pluralistic industry. We'll see new companies coming in who operate in a different way. And, the most optimistic side of me says clients will start saying, let's not look at how much money we spend, let's look how much money we make. and they would change the focus from spending money to ROI, to business growth, to improved margin, profitability, all that stuff. We're miles away from that right now. And until we get to that point, then we're going to remain an unprofessional services industry.
You think holding companies should be broken up?
I think I'd like them not to be, but the way that they're going, that is almost inevitable, I think. And if you look at the numbers, and there's a lot of buzz about this right now, WPP in particular, and so on. If you look at the numbers, they're growing at 2.3% per annum on average. It's very, very small. Some of them are not growing at all. And the answer to not growing at all is to do more proprietary media, it appears, which is what has happened with IPG in particular. They were underperforming versus their peer group. So the analysts said, you should be doing what Publicis and Omnicom do. Do more proprietary media. That's the answer. And you kind of go, if that's the answer, I don't think it's the right question. So if they're only growing at 2.3%, Amazon's growing at 24%, Google at 25%, TikTok at 29%, whatever the numbers are, then they are being, they're being eroded. And everything you talked about earlier on about the change in the advertising industry towards self-service, disintermediation, clients having in-house studios, AI coming in and hitting the creative agencies in the way that it's going to. All of that says that the holding companies are going to find it harder and harder and harder. They are the sandcastle on the beach. The waves are getting closer, and there will come a time, I do believe, and I don't take any pleasure in this whatsoever, I do believe that the waves will hit that sandcastle and we'll start to see some erosion, and then very likely I think there'll be some breaking up maybe in 5 years or so time.
What about people that work in this industry? So, you started Manning Gottlieb Media, was it 1990 you founded?
I'm afraid it was, yes.
Yeah. Sold to Omnicom about 10 years later, is that right?
A bit less, but yeah.
Yeah. Somebody, that was a common thing that people did, entrepreneurial people that wanted to make money. They got to a senior level at an agency and they thought, do you know what, I could do this myself. Yeah. I get rich, and there's always going to be an Omnicom or a WPP to sell to eventually. Yeah. What hope would you have for somebody like that nowadays, given everything we've said, and you see it as inevitable that the holding companies are going to break up? Or do you see it a different way where it could give rise to a new range of independent agencies who could have a lucrative future doing it differently?
Yeah, I do. Well, I think what will happen, because it always does, is the law of the jungle will come along, and there will be very smart people who will decide that they're going to go off in a different tangent. We're seeing a bit of that now with the recreation of a sort of creative and media coming back together again in agencies like TMP and VCCP. I think more of that will happen. Other people will see other commercial opportunities, but it's not going to be in the traditional media agency space necessarily. I think there's always room for niche products in retail media, for example, digital commerce and so on. There's always offshoots that can work, but we need a wholesale change, really, and a complete reset. But the people who are going to do that will emerge. They always do. And somebody somewhere is going to come out with a different model. And over time, there will be more competition and a much more pluralistic industry to come. And it won't happen for quite a long time, but it will happen, I think. And I hope there's a whole new generation of budding entrepreneurs, bright people. We're not short of talent in this industry. It's underpaid, it's overworked, but we've got a lot of it. The question really is, are people prepared to, grasp the opportunity? Is there a gap in the market as well as a market in the gap? All those things. And I sure hope so. I think there always has been in the past. And I hope so in the future as well. And if the holding companies eventually do get broken up, then I think that will change the game considerably. And I hope so. I'm not saying I hope the holding companies get broken up, because they employ a lot of people and I care about those people's jobs. But I'm talking about the business model behind all of this. And working in a holding company agency right now is a hard place to be for all the reasons that we've been talking about. But there are beacons of light all round if you look for them. But in a way, what Brian and I are trying to do is to sort of say, where can we find those beacons of light, and how can we make them shine brighter to stretch the analogy, beyond its natural life. So that's kind of a lot of what we're doing and trying to say is we want to build an industry that people want to work in, and have better lives in, and that's not necessarily the case. So when I went back to my alma mater a month or so ago for a dinner, I was talking to one of the people there, a fundraising person, and I said, "How do you think undergraduates here think about advertising these days?" She said, "They don't think about advertising these days." I said, "Do you think they consider it to be a career they might want to go into?" She said, "If I'm being honest, probably not. If you go to the careers people for the university, they would say, 'Oh yes, you can still be an account man or a media man or whatever,' and they're living in the 1980s still. Even as they were they weren't living in the 80s when I was there. They were living in the 70s, and they still are. So we have an issue really, because we're not going to attract the people we need. We're not going to pay them the money they need. There's so many other places you can go. Law graduates, freshly graduated, earning 150 grand a year at Linklaters or Freshfields, 180 grand at American, company, 180,000 pounds, not dollars. So, okay, you've got to do a law degree and all that sort of stuff. But, Google are paying double for their starters to what the agencies are paying. If you're given a choice, you're not going to do that. And that's why, it doesn't help DE&I and all the things we've been talking about.
Okay, on that cheery note, I think this is a fascinating discussion, and I'm intrigued to see what comes out of the event that you're going to have in September. I think it'll be a distillation of many of the things that we regularly feature on the Media Leader, often through your column, which we're very appreciative for as well. And I think that the important thing is not just to focus on the problems, of which obviously we've highlighted, but also what can be done about it. So that's why we talk about regulation, or how the market can fix it in itself, because something does need to change, clearly. We're heading towards a cliff of some sort, and it really, at some point you need to say, hey, we need to slow down, or at least talk about a different path.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful to you for that. And so if people want to find out more about this event and to get involved, how do they do that?
If you go to Brian's blog, the COG blog, or my columns in the Media Leader, it's all in there. So the contact details, we lay out very clearly what it is we're trying to achieve. So the last column, not the one about proprietary media, but the one about advertising, it has got all the details in there. And that's now all over LinkedIn. It's all over the internet. If you look for Brian or myself, Brian Jacobs or Nick Manning, you'll find it now. We're putting out regular bulletins now to the 150 or so people who've volunteered. They're getting a weekly newsletter with updates and things. So if you want us, you can find us. And we haven't got a website or anything like that. We're not going to do that because we're trying to make it voluntary, and we're trying to get people to come to us rather than us going to them. We've got help from other parties. I'm still not going to have a website. I might be wrong about that. We haven't decided. It might be sensible to do one, actually, thinking about it. But this is kind of this is a bit sort of feeling our way through it. But yeah, you can find stuff from me and Brian anywhere you look. And so if you're interested, then do that.
And I love the sound of that. I love how what you just said, feeling our way through it, because I think that, because again, I'm going to have the disclaimer where a lot of this may come across to listeners as anti-digital in air quotes, but from my perspective anyway, it's definitely not trying to be that. And as you've just said, we might build a website. We're going to do newsletters. We're going to, we've got all these online things that we're leveraging. Like the internet has brought us such amazing tools for communication, and I wouldn't want anyone to think that we were arguing against that. It's just that there is a particular problem with the way that we're commercializing this thing that this. I'm always reference this David Bowie quote. I just love it, from 20 years ago, where he was being interviewed by Jeremy Paxman, and he described the internet as this alien that's landed on Earth, and we don't really understand how it works. Yeah. I think 20 years later, that is still true today, and we're all feeling our way through things. And I think that's the magic of new media, if I can call it that, where content creators nowadays, they haven't got it all figured out. And I think the magic nowadays lies in you building a following of readers, viewers, listeners who are on that journey with you. And it's a very different model to TV broadcasters where it's always glitzy, well-produced stuff, where actually the authenticity, to use a buzzword, is coming from people knowing that you haven't got it all figured out, and they want to take that journey. They want to help. You're accessible as a content creator. Not that I'd reduce you to being a content creator, but you know what I mean. In terms of how we communicate online, it's a very it's a nuanced sensibility that I think it is the beauty of how we communicate online.
The only thing we're anti is bad advertising or badvertising, as I didn't christen it that, actually. I stole that, even though I didn't realise I had until I went to a bookshop and found that somebody already used it.
Because I'll talk about this publicly. I've often flirted with the idea of writing a book, and you mentioned bad advertising. I thought, that is a perfect book title. If I ever write a book one day, that is something. And so I googled it. I went on Amazon.
It's already been done.
It's like 10 bad advertising books already.
Yeah, but no, we're anti-bad advertising. We're anti-abuse of the public through loss of privacy, bombarding them with ads. We're anti being an industry that people don't want to work in. We're anti people making money at advertising for the sake of making money rather than doing good advertising. There's loads of things we're not in favour of, but we are in favour of good advertising, good practices, making the advertising industry better again, making advertising better again, and being a place that people want to stay in and come and work at. And we've got to reverse an awful lot of the stuff that's been going on in order to achieve that. But we're quietly, we're not quietly confident. That's not true. In fact, it's not true at all.
You're loudly nervous.
We're loudly nervous. But if we don't talk about it, then nothing's going to change. And if we do talk about it, we might make some change.
Good. Yes, that's a much more positive note to end on. So I will end now. Nick Manning, thank you so much for coming on once again to the Media Leader podcast.
My pleasure. That's been great fun.
Thanks again for listening to the Media Leader podcast. If you like what you hear, guess what? You can read our stuff at our website, themedialeader.co.uk, where you can sign up to our daily newsletter in the UK of analysis, opinion and commentary about what's going on in media and advertising. You can also find us on YouTube. We are posting video interviews and clips from our live events. And don't forget to check out our LinkedIn page, which is often a very interesting way to see what people in the industry are saying about our articles and the issues we write about. Anyway, get back to work. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.